Hey folks, before the video starts, I want to say big thank you for the feedback you gave me in the last video. Again, I will be short and say, as every other video, to leave a like and hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to comment down below, helping me to give proof to YouTube that all of you who follow this channel so far are real people who watch my videos. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. I found a dark web video of my college roommate being stalked by a masked man. She went missing a week ago. Hey Reddit, this is my first time posting here, and honestly, I don't know where else to turn. I need to share this story because it's been eating away at me, and I can't sleep knowing what I saw. I've debated whether or not I should even talk about it. It feels like putting it out there might somehow make everything worse. But here goes. About a week ago, my roommate and best friend Jess went missing. Jess wasn't the kind of person who just vanished. She was bubbly, reliable, and super organized. I mean, she literally color-coded her closet and scheduled her life down to the minute on Google Calendar. So when she didn't come back to our dorm after a study session at the library, I immediately knew something was wrong. At first, everyone brushed it off. "Oh, she probably just went to a party and forgot to tell you," they said. Even the campus police didn't seem too concerned. But I knew Jess. If she was going somewhere, she'd text. If she was going to be late, she'd call. She wasn't the type to just disappear into the night. The first 2 days after she went missing were a blur. I plastered flyers around campus, called her family, and sat through police interviews that felt more like interrogations. People started whispering about her at the cafeteria and in hallways. Maybe she ran away, some said. Others whispered darker theories, none of which I wanted to believe. But then something happened that flipped my world upside down. How I ended up on the dark web. Okay, before you judge me, let me explain. I didn't just wake up one day and think, hey, let me browse the dark web for fun. I'm not that person. But Jess and I used to watch these YouTube videos about the dark web, those creepy storytime videos where someone would talk about ordering a mystery box or finding a cursed website. We'd laugh about how fake it all seemed, but deep down, I think we both wondered if there was any truth to it. After Jess went missing, I got desperate. The police weren't making any progress. Her family was distraught, and I felt completely helpless. One night, while scrolling through Reddit threads about missing persons cases, I stumbled onto a post that mentioned finding clues about disappearances on the dark web. It sounded insane, but the idea got stuck in my head. I downloaded Tor, the browser you need to access the dark web, and after about an hour of fumbling around, I found myself on forums that looked like they hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. The pages were filled with broken English, sketchy links, and cryptic usernames. At first, it all seemed like a dead end, just a bunch of wannabe hackers talking about conspiracy theories. But then I found a thread titled Unsolved Mysteries, Campus Stalker Files. My heart sank when I clicked it. The masked man. The thread was filled with videos, grainy, low-resolution clips that looked like they were filmed on ancient security cameras or old flip phones. Most of them seemed random. People walking down dark alleys or sitting in cafes. But then, as I scrolled through the thumbnails, I saw one that made my stomach twist into knots. It was Jess. The video title read, Target Jessa, Observation Day 4. I clicked on it, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my laptop. The video started with a wide-angle shot of our campus library. It was nighttime, and Jess was sitting at her usual spot by the big windows. She had her headphones on and was scribbling something in her notebook. At first, it just looked like a normal surveillance clip, like something you'd see from a campus security camera. But then the camera zoomed in. Whoever was filming wasn't using a security camera. This was handheld. You could see the jitter of the lens as it focused on Jess's face. The quality was terrible, but I could tell it was her. She looked so peaceful, so unaware. The video cut abruptly to a different angle. This time, the person filming was outside, crouched in the bushes near the library windows. I could hear their breathing, slow and deliberate, like they were trying to stay quiet. The camera lingered on Jess for what felt like an eternity before the screen went black. That's when the real nightmare began. The messages. As soon as the video ended, my laptop froze. I panicked, thinking I'd accidentally downloaded some virus, but then a chat box popped up on the screen. The username was just a random string of numbers and letters, but the message made my blood run cold. Enjoy the show? I slammed my laptop shut like an idiot, as if that would somehow make it stop. My heart was racing, and I could barely breathe. After a few minutes, I forced myself to open the laptop again, half expecting the screen to be completely blank or for my computer to crash. But the chat box was still there, and the user had sent another message. Want to see more? I didn't reply. I couldn't. My hands were frozen, and my brain felt like it was short-circuiting. Before I could even think of what to do next, they sent one last message. Check your email. The email. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, or maybe I thought there might be some kind of clue about Jess. But when I opened my inbox, there it was, an email from a completely untraceable address. The subject line was simple. Observation Day 5. There was a video attachment. I didn't want to click it. Every part of me was screaming not to, but my fingers betrayed me. The video loaded instantly, and what I saw made me feel like I was going to throw up. It was a video of Jess walking back to our dorm. The footage was shaky, like it had been recorded on a phone by someone following close behind. She kept looking over her shoulder, her pace quickening with every step. The person filming didn't stop. They kept following her, closer and closer, until she reached our building. The video cut out just as Jess disappeared inside. Now, what? That's where I'm at right now. I don't know who to turn to or what to do. The police aren't taking me seriously, and every time I try to tell someone about the videos, I feel like they think I'm making it up. I haven't told anyone about the email yet, and honestly, I'm scared to. What if they're still watching me? What if I'm next? I'm going to keep digging, but if anything happens to me, I need people to know about this. Jess didn't just disappear. Someone was stalking her, and now they're taunting me with these videos. I'll update you all if I find anything else, but for now, just be careful. If you ever think someone's following you, don't brush it off. And whatever you do, stay away from the dark web. After watching the second video, I felt like my whole world was spinning out of control. My dorm room, which used to feel like a cozy, safe place, suddenly felt suffocating. Every little noise outside, footsteps, doors creaking, the distant hum of campus life, sent my heart racing. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. I couldn't sleep that night. I just sat there on my bed, with my laptop open, staring at the email, trying to figure out what to do. The sender's address was just as cryptic as the chat username, a random string of characters followed by something I'd never seen before. Onion. I knew enough from my dark web research to know that .onion addresses weren't traceable. It was like trying to track a ghost. I considered deleting the email. Maybe if I got rid of it, I could pretend none of this was happening. But what if there was a clue in it? Something that could help me find Jess? As terrified as I was, the thought of leaving her out there, wherever she was, kept me glued to my seat. That's when I heard the first knock. The knocks. It wasn't loud, just a faint, almost polite tap on the door. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. It was nearly 3 a.m. Who the hell knocks on a dorm room door at 3 a.m.? My first thought was that it was someone from my floor playing a prank. But when I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. Just the dimly lit hallway, completely empty. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe one of my neighbors had knocked on the wrong door by accident. I went back to my bed, but I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling creeping over me. My eyes kept darting to the door, my mind replaying the sound of those knocks over and over. Then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it was louder. I grabbed my phone and texted my friend Lisa, who lived 2 doors down. "Hey, are you awake? Someone keeps knocking on my door, and it's freaking me out." She replied almost immediately. "No." "Wife, want me to come over?" Before I could respond, the knocks came again. 3 sharp, deliberate taps, like whoever it was wanted me to know they weren't going away. I worked up the courage to open the door. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself think. I flipped the lock, swung the door open, and nothing. The hallway was completely empty, but something was different this time. Lying on the floor, just outside my door, was a small black USB drive. The drive. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at that tiny piece of plastic like it was a bomb about to go off. My first instinct was to slam the door and pretend I hadn't seen it, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed it and shut the door as fast as I could, locking it behind me. I plugged the drive into my laptop, half expecting it to fry my computer or download some kind of virus. Instead, it opened a single folder labeled Roommate Logs. My stomach churned as I clicked on it. Inside were dozens of video files, each one titled with a date and time. The most recent one was from the night Jess went missing. I hesitated before clicking it, but I knew I had to. The screen flickered and the video began. The night Jess disappeared. The footage was shaky, clearly filmed on a phone. It started with Jess leaving the library. I recognized the path she was taking. It was the same shortcut we always used to get back to the dorms. Whoever was filming was following her from a distance, their footsteps muffled but steady. Jess looked over her shoulder several times. She must have sensed someone was behind her, but she didn't run. She just walked faster, clutching her bag tightly. The camera zoomed in on her face, and I could see the fear in her eyes. Then, about halfway down the path, she stopped. The camera shifted to show what she was looking at. A figure standing under one of the streetlights, wearing a white mask and a long dark coat. The mask wasn't like a Halloween mask or anything. It was plain, featureless, with just 2 empty eye holes, the kind of thing that feels wrong the longer you look at it. The figure didn't move. They just stood there, staring at Jess. Or at least, I think they were staring. It was hard to tell with the mask. Jess froze for a moment, then turned and started walking in the opposite direction. That's when the person filming started running. The camera shook violently as they closed the distance between them and Jess. She turned, saw them coming, and screamed. The last thing the video showed was her dropping her bag and sprinting toward the dorms. Then the screen went black. What the hell was going on? I sat there, staring at the blank screen, my hands trembling. My mind was racing with questions. Who was the masked figure? Who was filming? And how the hell did this USB drive end up outside my door? I checked the folder again and noticed something I hadn't seen before. A text file called instructions.txt. I opened it, and what I read sent chills down my spine. You've seen too much. If you want to stay safe, do not involve the police. Watch the videos carefully. The answers are there. The answers to what? Where Jess was? Who was behind this? I wanted to scream, to throw the laptop against the wall and pretend none of this was happening. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stop now. Jess was out there somewhere, and I was the only one who seemed to care enough to dig into this. The surveillance. I spent the rest of the night going through the other videos on the drive. They were all surveillance footage of Jess. Some were from campus security cameras, but others were more personal, filmed from inside classrooms, the dining hall, even our dorm room. I recognized the angles, the slight tilt of the camera. These were all taken from hidden cameras. One video in particular made my skin crawl. It showed Jess sitting at her desk, headphones on, completely oblivious. The camera was hidden somewhere in the ceiling, looking straight down at her. In the corner of the frame, just barely visible, was the edge of the same white mask I'd seen in the previous video. They were in our room. The realization. That's when it hit me. Whoever was behind this hadn't just been stalking Jess. They were still here, still watching. The knocks, the USB drive, the cryptic messages. It wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. I don't know what they want from me or why they're playing these sick games. But one thing is clear. Jess isn't the only target. Now, I'm afraid to close my eyes, afraid to leave my room, afraid to check my email, my phone, even my reflection in the mirror, because whoever they are, they're watching, and they're not done with me yet. I barely made it through that night. The air in my dorm room felt heavy, like the walls were closing in around me. Every shadow in the room seemed darker, deeper. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me, even though I knew I was alone. At least, I hoped I was alone. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Jess running, the white mask under the streetlight, and those dead, empty eye holes staring back at me. But what haunted me most wasn't what I'd already seen. It was what I hadn't. The unanswered questions, the gaps in the story that I was too afraid to fill in. I told myself I needed to get out of the room, to clear my head and figure out my next move. But when I tried to step outside, I froze. I couldn't shake the image of that USB drive lying on the floor. If someone had gotten that close to me once, they could do it again. What if they were waiting for me in the hallway or outside the building? I double-checked the locks on my door and windows, grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a metal desk lamp, and sat by the door, just waiting. That's when I heard the whispering. The sound. At first, I thought it was just in my head. I was exhausted, paranoid, and probably losing my mind. But as I sat there in the silence, gripping the lamp like it was a weapon, I realized the sound was real. It was faint, barely audible, like a voice carried on the wind. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to make out the words, but it didn't sound like any language I recognized. It was just a low, rhythmic murmur, almost hypnotic, the kind of sound that makes your skin crawl, even if you don't know why. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe someone's TV was on, or one of my neighbors was talking in their room. But the more I listened, the more I realized the sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside the room. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just my messy desk, my unmade bed, and the faint glow of my laptop screen. The whispering stopped as soon as I turned, leaving me in a silence that was somehow worse. I was about to convince myself I'd imagined it when I noticed something I hadn't before. My closet door, which I always kept closed, was open just a crack. The closet. I stared at that sliver of darkness for what felt like hours. My logical brain was screaming at me to check it out, to prove there was nothing there, but every instinct in my body told me to run. I gripped the lamp tighter, creeping towards the closet with slow, deliberate steps. The air felt colder as I got closer. My breath came out in shaky puffs, and my hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. When I finally swung the door open, I almost wished I hadn't. There was nothing inside, no masked figure, no hidden cameras, just my clothes hanging neatly on their hangers. But something was wrong. The smell. My closet reeked of damp earth, like the air after a rainstorm, but stronger. It was the kind of smell that makes you feel like you've walked into a graveyard. I stepped back, my pulse pounding in my ears, and that's when I saw it. Scrawled on the inside of the closet door, just above my eye level, was a single word written in something dark and shiny. Run. The morning. After. I didn't sleep at all after that. I sat in the middle of my room, my back against the wall, the desk lamp still in my hands. Every so often, I'd glance at the closet, half expecting the door to swing open again, but nothing happened. When the sun finally rose, I felt a tiny sliver of relief. Somehow, the light made everything seem less terrifying, even though I knew it didn't solve anything. I had to get out of the dorm, but I couldn't leave without a plan. Whoever was doing this wanted me scared, disoriented, and isolated. If I was going to figure out what happened to Jess, and why I was now caught in this nightmare, I needed to think clearly. I packed a bag with essentials, my laptop, charger, and a few changes of clothes. I didn't trust the campus Wi-Fi anymore, so I stopped by the local library to use their internet. The whole walk there, I kept checking over my shoulder, convinced I was being followed. Every time I heard footsteps, I quickened my pace, clutching my bag like it was a lifeline. The library was nearly empty, which only made the place feel eerier. I found a secluded corner, set up my laptop, and tried to make sense of everything I'd seen so far. I opened the USB folder again, scanning through the videos for anything I might have missed. That's when I found it. A file I hadn't noticed before. It was buried in a subfolder, hidden among random, mislabeled files. The video was called Day 7 Final Visit. Day 7. The video started with a shot of my dorm building. The camera was shaky, and whoever was filming was standing just outside, in the shadows. I could hear their breathing, slow and deliberate, like they were savoring the moment. My stomach churned as I realized the timestamp was from the night Jess disappeared. The camera panned to a window on the second floor. My window. The angle was just high enough to show Jess's silhouette inside the room. She was pacing back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but she looked upset, frantic even. I tried to remember if she'd called me that night. but my memory was a blur. The camera zoomed in, focusing on the edge of the window frame. That's when I saw it. The white mask. It was barely visible, peeking out from the shadows at the corner of the window, but it was there, watching her, watching us. The video cut abruptly to the inside of the dorm. I have no idea how they got in, but the footage was crystal clear, like it was filmed on a high-end camera. Jess was asleep in her bed, the room bathed in the soft glow of her desk lamp. The figure in the mask stood in the doorway, perfectly still. They didn't move, didn't make a sound. They just stood there, staring at her. After what felt like an eternity, they stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. They stopped at the edge of her bed, reached into their coat, and pulled out a small black object. It looked like a recorder or a phone, but I couldn't be sure. The screen went black, a warning. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking so badly I almost knocked it off the table. My mind was racing. How had they gotten inside? How long had they been watching us? And why hadn't Jess told me she was scared? I thought we told each other everything. I was about to leave the library when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number popped up on the screen. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like her." I stared at the message, my blood running cold. My first instinct was to call the police, but the warning from the text file on the USB drive played in my head. Do not involve the police. Whoever this was, they were serious. They'd been in my room, left me that USB drive, and now they were texting me. I didn't know what they were capable of, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I left the library in a daze, clutching my bag so tightly my fingers started to ache. The walk back to my dorm felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream, or a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every person I passed seemed suspicious. A guy jogging by with earbuds in, a girl laughing on her phone, even the campus security guard at the front gate. Any one of them could be involved. Any one of them could be watching me. When I got back to my room, it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt contaminated, violated. Someone had been here, had stood in my space, breathing the same air. My stomach churned as I imagined the masked figure standing at the foot of my bed while I slept. How many nights had they watched me without my knowledge? I shoved a chair under the doorknob, locked the windows again, and sat on my bed, staring at the closet. My laptop was still open, the USB drive plugged in like a parasite feeding off my fear. I debated pulling it out, smashing it, and pretending none of this had ever happened. But deep down, I knew that wasn't an option. Whoever they weren't going to stop just because I ignored them. Then I noticed something new, something that hadn't been there before. The carving above my desk, on the wall, where I used to hang Polaroids of Jess and me, was a small, faint carving. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, like it had been scratched into the paint with a knife or a key. I leaned in close, running my fingers over it, and realized it wasn't just random scratches. It was a symbol, a circle with a single line slashed through the middle. It felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. The longer I stared at it, the more unsettled I felt. It wasn't just a mark, it was a message. Someone had been in my room again, and they wanted me to know it. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the carving, then started frantically Googling it. The results were vague. Occult forums, conspiracy theories, vague mentions of warding symbols and protection runes. But one link caught my eye, a Reddit thread titled, "The Watchers, a Guide to the Masked Ones." The Watchers, The thread was buried deep in a subreddit dedicated to urban legends and internet mysteries. Most of the comments were filled with people joking or arguing over whether it was real, but the original post sent chills down my spine. It described a group, or maybe just one person no one seemed to know, known as the Watchers. They were supposedly a shadowy presence that targeted people, following them, recording them, leaving cryptic messages before they vanished without a trace. The post claimed their symbol was a circle with a line through it, the same one carved into my wall. I scrolled through the comments, my heart racing. Some people claimed to have seen the Watchers in their towns, or heard stories from friends who'd gone missing. Others dismissed it as a hoax, a dark web scare tactic designed to keep people paranoid. But one comment stood out. It was from a user with no profile picture and a username that was just random numbers. It simply read, "If you've seen the symbol, it's already too late. They're watching. The blackout." I was about to close my laptop when the screen flickered. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, but then the entire room went dark. The overhead light, my desk lamp, even the faint glow from my laptop, they all went out at once. The sudden silence was deafening. No hum of electronics, no sound of the mini fridge running, just dead air. I fumbled for my phone, using the flashlight to scan the room. My hands were shaking so badly the light wobbled, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. I pointed it toward the closet first, then the windows. Everything seemed normal, but the oppressive silence made my skin crawl. That's when I heard it. The whispering was back. It was louder this time, closer. It wasn't coming from inside the room. It was coming from the hallway. I crept towards the door, my footsteps as quiet as I could make them, and pressed my ear against the wood. The whispering was clearer now, a low, guttural sound that didn't sound entirely human. It wasn't a conversation. It was one voice, muttering something over and over, too fast for me to understand. I dropped to my knees and peeked under the door. At first, I didn't see anything. The hallway was pitch black, just an endless void of darkness. But then I noticed movement. 2 pale feet, bare and motionless, standing just outside my door. The visitor, my breath caught in my throat. The feet didn't move, didn't shift or step away. They just stood there, as if the person was waiting for me to make the first move. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, like it was coming from everywhere at once. I wanted to scream, to grab my phone and call someone, anyone, but I knew that whoever or whatever was outside my door wasn't here to talk. They were here to send a message. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the whispering stopped. I blinked, unsure if my ears were playing tricks on me. The feet were still there, but now they were completely still. No sound, no movement, just silence. Then I saw the note. A small folded piece of paper slid under the door, pushed in by those pale, unmoving feet. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't ignore it either. With trembling hands, I picked it up and unfolded it. The note was written in messy, uneven handwriting, as if the person had been in a hurry, or shaking as they wrote it. It said, "She saw the mask. Now, she's gone. You're next. The mask returns." I backed away from the door, clutching the note like it was a grenade about to explode. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. I wanted to run, to grab my keys and bolt out of the building, but I knew I couldn't outrun this. Whatever this was, it was everywhere. It had been in my room, outside my door, in my life for longer than I even realized. Then I saw the reflection. The mirror on my closet door showed me standing in the middle of the room, pale and wide-eyed. But it also showed something else, something behind me. The mask. It was only there for a second, just a fleeting glimpse, before the lights flickered back on and the room was flooded with artificial brightness. I spun around, my hands raised defensively, but the room was empty. No masked figure, no shadowy presence, just me, alone with my fear. But I knew better. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been for a long time. The choice. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Whoever these people are, they're not playing games. They're methodical, patient, and terrifyingly real. Jess isn't just missing. She's been taken, stalked, hunted, and taken. And now, I'm their next target. But I won't go down without a fight. I'm going to dig deeper, find out who they are and what they want, even if it kills me. Because if there's one thing I've learned in all of this, it's that the watchers don't stop. They don't give up, and they're always watching. By the time I decided to leave my dorm, the sun was already setting. I didn't care where I went. I just knew I couldn't stay there. I packed everything I thought might be useful. My laptop, the USB drive, the photo of the carving, and the note. I stuffed it all into my backpack and slipped out the door as quietly as I could, avoiding the creaky floorboards that I'd memorized after months of late-night sneaking around. The hallways were eerily quiet, too quiet. Normally, you could hear faint music or the murmur of someone's TV, but now it was like the entire building had been abandoned. My footsteps echoed as I hurried down the stairs, half expecting to feel cold hands grab me from behind at any second. I made it outside without incident, but the cold air didn't bring the relief I was hoping for. It felt wrong, thick and heavy, like the night itself was pressing down on me. I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking, keeping my head low and my eyes scanning every shadow. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get somewhere safe. The final message. As I walked, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my heart sinking, when I saw another text from the same unknown number. Look behind you. My legs froze. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to do it. I didn't want to know what was there, but something inside me, a sick, masochistic curiosity, forced me to turn around. At first, I didn't see anything, just the empty sidewalk stretching back toward my dorm, the faint glow of streetlights flickering in the distance. Then, just at the edge of the light, I saw them. 3 figures, all wearing the same featureless white mask. They stood perfectly still, their heads tilted slightly, as if studying me. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They just stared, the empty eye holes of their masks boring into me, like they could see everything, every thought, every fear, every secret. I turned and ran. The abandoned building. I don't remember how long I ran or where my feet carried me. I just remember the burn in my lungs and the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. By the time I stopped, I was standing in front of an old crumbling building on the edge of campus. It looked abandoned, windows boarded up, paint peeling off the walls, but the door was slightly ajar, like it had been waiting for me. I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder. The street behind me was empty, no sign of the masked figures, but I could feel them. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew they were still there, watching me from somewhere in the darkness. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. And the room. The air inside was damp and musty, heavy with the smell of mildew. My phone flashlight barely illuminated the narrow hallway, the walls lined with graffiti and broken furniture. I didn't want to go any further, but something, call it instinct, call it stupidity, kept pulling me forward. At the end of the hall, I found a room. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, my flashlight caught something that made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in photos, hundreds of them pinned up haphazardly, overlapping each other in a chaotic collage. They were all of Jess walking to class, Jess studying in the library, Jess sitting at her desk in our dorm room. The photos spanned weeks, maybe months, and at the center of it all was a single word, scrawled in red paint: obey. I felt sick. My hands trembled as I stepped closer, scanning the photos for any clue, any sign of where she might be. That's when I noticed the video camera. It was sitting on a tripod in the corner of the room, pointed directly at the wall of photos. The red light was on. It was recording. The revelation. Before I could think, the camera beeped and the recording stopped. A small screen flipped out on the side of the camera, displaying a message. Playback available. Do you want to watch? I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed not to, but my fingers moved on their own, pressing the play button before I could stop them. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy black and white video. It was Jess. She was sitting in a chair in the same room I was standing in, her hands tied behind her back. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale and streaked with tears. She was staring at something off camera, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Then the masked figure stepped into frame. They moved slowly, deliberately, circling Jess like a predator sizing up its prey. She flinched as they leaned in close, their face inches from hers. The figure tilted their head, almost as if they were studying her, and then they reached into their coat and pulled out a small black recorder. They pressed a button, and a voice crackled through the tiny speaker. It was distorted, but I could still recognize it. It was Jess's voice. "Run," the recording said. "Run, and don't stop. They're coming for you next." The figure turned toward the camera then, and for the first time, I felt like the mask was looking directly at me. The screen flickered, and the video ended. The escape. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the room, sprinting down the hallway and out into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across campus, my chest heaving and my legs threatening to give out. I've been sitting in the campus library ever since, surrounded by people, trying to convince myself that I'm safe. But I know I'm not. The watchers don't stop. They don't give up. And now I know why they've been targeting me. I wasn't just Jess's roommate. I wasn't just some random person caught in their twisted game. I was their next experiment. The end. My phone just buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "Nice try, but you can't run forever. See you soon. I don't know how much time I have left. If this is my last post, please, don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't go looking for answers where you're not supposed to. Don't dig into things you can't understand. And if you ever see the mask, don't stop. Don't think. Just run." My brother went missing while exploring caves in the Grand Canyon. A dark web forum claims he entered a military lab hidden underground. My brother Matt wasn't the type of guy who'd settle for an ordinary life. He hated desk jobs, hated routine, and most of all, hated feeling like the world had already been mapped and tamed. "What's the point of living," he once said, "if there's nothing left to discover?" That's why he spent most of his free time exploring abandoned buildings, off-trail caves, places most people wouldn't dream of going. So when he told me he was heading out to the Grand Canyon to check out some hidden spots he had read about on a forum, I didn't think much of it. Matt had been on hundreds of solo trips before and always came back with some insane story. But this time was different. This time, he didn't come back. I got the first sign something was wrong 3 days after he left. Usually, Matt would text me at least once during his trips, just to let me know he hadn't been eaten by a mountain lion or fallen into a ravine. But this time, silence. I shot him a quick text. "Hey, hope you're not dead in a cave somewhere. LOL, let me know you're alive." No response. At first I told myself his phone probably just lost service. That was normal for him. Matt liked to venture way off the grid, places where even GPS couldn't help you. But after another day passed, that uneasy feeling started to creep in. You know the one. The kind that starts in your gut and slowly climbs its way up your spine, wrapping itself around your brain until it's all you can think about. By day 5, I couldn't take it anymore. I called the park rangers and reported him missing. They were polite, but clearly unimpressed. "People get lost in the Grand Canyon all the time," one of them told me. "He's probably just taking longer than expected to get back to his car." But they agreed to check. A day later, they called me back. They'd found his car parked at a remote trailhead, right where he said he'd be. They even found his footprints leading toward a cave system called Horseshoe Mesa. But here's the thing. Matt never came back out. The rangers conducted a search, but they didn't find much. No gear, no supplies, no signs of a struggle. It was like he'd just vanished into the earth. That should have been the end of it. But then they found the blood. It wasn't a lot, just a couple of dark, dried smears on a jagged rock near the cave entrance. They couldn't confirm it was his. There wasn't enough of it for DNA testing, but it was fresh enough that it hadn't yet faded into the stone. The ranger I spoke to brushed it off. "Could be from anyone," he said. "People cut themselves climbing all the time." But I knew Matt. He was careful, methodical. If there was blood, something bad had happened. The Park Service called off the search after a week. They said they'd done all they could, and that Matt had likely gotten lost or injured deep in the caves. It happens more often than you think, apparently. Once you're far enough underground, the labyrinth of tunnels becomes impossible to navigate. People wander in, lose their sense of direction, and that's it. No food, no water, no way out. It was a nightmare I couldn't stop replaying in my head. Matt, stumbling through the pitch-black tunnels, his flashlight flickering, his voice echoing uselessly as he screamed for help. Did he know he was going to die? Did he feel the walls closing in, the air growing thinner? But even that wasn't the worst part, because as much as I hated the idea of Matt starving to death in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else had happened. Something worse. The first night after they called off the search, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing his face, the way he'd grinned at me before he left and said, "Don't worry, I'll come back with something cool to show you." His voice echoed in my ears, mocking me. Around 3 a.m., I finally gave up and went back to the last place he'd been, the internet. I started digging through forums, Reddit threads, and niche websites Matt used to frequent. Most of it was harmless, just a bunch of wannabe adventurers trading tips about the best gear or bragging about their latest finds. But then I stumbled on something darker. there was a thread titled, "Cave Systems They Don't Want You to Know About." The original post had been deleted, but the comments were still there. Most of them were just the usual conspiracy nonsense. The government's hiding aliens. There's treasure buried in the Grand Canyon. Blah blah blah. But one comment caught my eye. It was from a user named Nixend, and it simply said, "Don't go near Horseshoe Mesa. People who do never come back. It's not just a cave. It's a lab." A lab? What the hell was that supposed to mean? I clicked on the user's profile, but they hadn't posted anything else. Just that one cryptic comment. I sent them a message anyway. "Hey, you mentioned Horseshoe Mesa in a thread. My brother went missing there. Can you tell me what you know?" They didn't reply right away, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of some secret lab buried under the Grand Canyon sounded insane. Sure, but it also fit. Matt had always been drawn to forbidden places, the kind of spots you weren't supposed to find. If there was something out there, something hidden, he would have gone looking for it. It wasn't until the next day that I got a response. It was just one line, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. "Check your email." I opened my inbox and found a single message from an untraceable address. No subject line, no text, just an attachment. My hands were shaking as I clicked it open. It was a video. What I saw still makes my stomach turn. The footage was grainy, like it had been recorded on a phone from 10 years ago. It showed the entrance to a cave, dark and yawning, like the mouth of some ancient predator. And then there was movement. A figure, Matt, appeared on screen, walking towards the cave with a headlamp strapped to his forehead. He looked cautious but determined, like he knew exactly where he was going. But just as he disappeared inside, the camera jerked, like the person filming had stumbled. For a moment, the frame was filled with nothing but jagged rocks and darkness. And then there was blood. It was splattered across the rocks, thick and wet, still glistening in the dim light. The camera lingered on it for a moment before panning toward the cave again. This time, there was something else, something low and guttural, like the sound of metal scraping against bone. The video cut out abruptly after that, leaving me staring at the blank screen, my heart pounding. I wanted to tell myself it was fake, some sick prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The blood, the noise, the way Matt had disappeared so suddenly. Whatever was in that cave, it wasn't natural. And now, I had to find out what it was. After I watched the video for the 5th, or maybe 10th time, my hands were trembling so badly, I had to set my laptop down. The room felt smaller somehow, like the walls were pressing in. That metallic noise from the recording, it wasn't something you could mistake for wind or rocks shifting. It sounded alive, mechanical, yet organic, like metal grinding against bone, layered with an almost imperceptible growl. I wanted to believe the video was a hoax, some sick prank someone was pulling to mess with desperate family members like me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The figure in the video was Matt. The way he moved, his stupid way of rolling his shoulders when he walked, it was him. I was sure of it. The blood haunted me. It wasn't just the amount, it was the pattern. It wasn't smeared like someone had tripped and scraped themselves. It was splattered, fanned out across the rocks like someone, or something, had burst. It reminded me of the aftermath of a car accident I once saw. Blood sprayed in chaotic arcs, clinging to surfaces it shouldn't have reached. That wasn't the kind of injury you walk away from. I couldn't stop thinking about who had filmed the video. The camera wasn't Matt's. He hated recording himself on trips. Whoever had been following him wasn't there to lend a helping hand. They stayed back, silent and hidden, even when Matt entered the cave. And the way the camera lingered on the blood, it felt deliberate, almost voyeuristic, like whoever filmed it wanted me to see it. I thought about reaching out to the rangers again, but what could I say? Hey, someone sent me a video of my brother walking into a cave, and oh yeah, there's blood everywhere, and a noise that sounds like it came from Satan's toolbox. They'd either laugh me off or call the cops. Instead, I messaged Nixend again. Who filmed this? What's in the cave? The reply came almost instantly. I can't say much here. Look up Project Chimera. I should have stopped there. I should have let it go, mourned my brother, and moved on. But how could I? This wasn't a simple case of a guy getting lost in the wilderness. Someone was out there, following Matt, filming him, watching him bleed. And what the hell was Project Chimera? It took hours of digging, but I eventually found it. A conspiracy buried deep in the recesses of the internet, tucked away in obscure blogs and half-broken forum threads. Most of what I read was nonsense, the kind of stuff you'd expect from people who wear tinfoil hats and think lizard people run the government. But the consistent thread running through all the posts was this: Project Chimera was a Cold War experiment gone horribly wrong. The story went that in the 1960s, the military had constructed a series of underground labs in the Grand Canyon, disguised as natural caves. Officially, they were researching geological formations, testing mining equipment, and so on. Unofficially, they were working on something darker. One post claimed they were experimenting with genetic engineering, splicing human DNA with animal traits to create the perfect soldier. Another claimed they were studying a mysterious mineral found only in the canyon, something that could supposedly enhance human abilities. But the scariest theory was the simplest. They weren't building anything. They were containing something. The posts were full of phrases like biological anomaly and non-terrestrial origin. One even claimed that Project Chimera wasn't about creating monsters. It was about keeping them from escaping. I didn't know how much of it to believe, but something about the way the pieces fit together made my skin crawl. Matt had stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to find. Maybe he thought it was treasure, or an ancient burial site, or just some uncharted cave. But whatever it was, it had been waiting for him. I spent the next few nights barely sleeping, haunted by the video and the twisted theories I'd read. And then, on the third night, I got another email. This one didn't have a subject line or text either, just another video file. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity, fear, and a sick sense of obligation pushed me to click. The video picked up where the last one left off. Matt had entered the cave, and the camera followed him, its operator staying far enough back to remain unseen. The footage was shaky, the light from Matt's headlamp the only source of illumination. He was talking to himself, something he always did when he was nervous. Okay, this is definitely off the map, he muttered. His voice was tight, the usual confidence replaced with something closer to apprehension. Damn, it stinks in here. As he moved deeper, the camera panned to the walls of the cave. They were covered in strange markings, scratches, almost like claw marks, but too deep and deliberate to have been made by an animal. The ground was littered with debris, broken rocks, scattered tools, and something that made my stomach churn. Fragments of clothing, a shredded jacket sleeve, a boot, the the soul half melted, like it had been exposed to acid. And then there was the blood. It was everywhere, staining the walls and pooling in the cracks of the uneven floor. The camera operator didn't react to it, didn't even pause to acknowledge it. They just kept following Matt, silent and unseen. The deeper Matt went, the stranger the cave became. The walls, once rough and natural, began to smooth out, like they'd been carved by machines. Strange symbols, ones I didn't recognize, were etched into the stone, glowing faintly in the darkness. Matt noticed too. "What the hell is this?" he whispered, running his hand over the markings. His voice echoed, distorted and hollow, like the cave itself was swallowing it. This doesn't feel right." He stopped walking, his headlamp flickering as he stared into the darkness ahead. "Hello," he called, his voice louder now, laced with fear. "Is someone there?" And then I heard it again, that metallic noise, louder this time, closer, like it was coming from just beyond the edge of the light. It wasn't a single sound, it was layers of sound, grinding and wet, like steel gears coated in something viscous. Matt froze, his breathing quick and shallow. "Okay," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "I'm getting the hell out of here." He turned to leave, but before he could take a step, the light from his headlamp caught something on the ground. A hand, pale, skeletal, the flesh stripped down to sinew and bone. And then the light flickered again, illuminating the rest of the figure. A body, crumpled and broken, with its torso twisted at an impossible angle. Its face was gone, the skull caved in like it had been crushed. The camera zoomed in, focusing on the body for a long, nauseating moment. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My brother's voice cracked as he whispered, "Jesus Christ." The video cut off after that, leaving me staring at my laptop in horror. My heart was pounding, my skin cold and clammy. I didn't know what I just watched, but one thing was clear. Matt hadn't found a cave. He'd found something worse, something waiting. I don't know how long I sat there after watching the second video. Time felt warped, like the very air around me was heavier, harder to breathe. My laptop screen had gone black, but I couldn't bring myself to close it. The image of that twisted, broken body was burned into my mind. It wasn't just dead. It had been mangled, its flesh torn apart in a way that no animal could have done. And those claw marks, those strange glowing symbols. What the hell had Matt walked into? My hands were trembling as I typed out another message to Nick's end. "What's in the cave? What happened to my brother?" For hours, there was no response. I must have refreshed the page 100 times, my paranoia growing with every passing minute. Finally, around 2 a.m., the reply came. "You've seen too much already. Stop digging, or you'll end up like him." Like him. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What did they mean? Was Matt dead? My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, my mind spinning with possibilities. I started typing furiously. "I'm not stopping until I know the truth. You owe me that much." For a long time, there was nothing, just the faint hum of my laptop and the pounding of my heart. Then, a single message appeared. "It's not just a cave, it's a door." That single word, door, changed everything. Suddenly, all the cryptic details I'd uncovered started to form a picture, one that made me feel sick to my core. The lab, the markings, the body in the video, they weren't random. They were part of something larger, something deliberate. If the cave was a door, then what the hell was on the other side? The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that body, the symbols, the blood. I tried to distract myself, but nothing worked. Eventually, I gave in and dove back into my research. I started looking for anything I could find about strange activity near Horseshoe Mesa. At first, I came up with nothing, just a few vague mentions of missing hikers and urban legends about hidden treasure. But then, I stumbled onto something chilling. An old article from 1983 detailed the disappearance of a group of geology students who'd been mapping cave systems in the Grand Canyon. According to the report, the students had been exploring an uncharted section of Horseshoe Mesa when they stopped responding to radio calls. A search team was sent in, but they found no trace of the group, except for a single backpack, torn to shreds and soaked in blood. The article mentioned unusual claw marks on the surrounding rocks, but the official explanation was a mountain lion attack. The case was quietly closed, and the area was declared off-limits. It wasn't just the students. Over the years, there had been dozens of disappearances near that same cave system. Hikers, climbers, even a park ranger. The details were always the same. Blood, claw marks, no bodies. The more I read, the more I felt like I was being watched. I know that sounds paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was keeping tabs on me. My phone glitched constantly. My internet connection slowed to a crawl, and random pop-ups started appearing on my laptop, warning me about unauthorized access. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but then I got another email. This one had no attachments, no text, just a subject line that read, "Stop." It came from the same untraceable address as before. My blood ran cold as I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Whoever was behind this didn't want me digging any further, but the more they tried to scare me, the more determined I became. If Matt was still alive, I had to find him. And if he wasn't, I needed to know what had happened. I decided to reach out to someone who might know more. There was an old spelunking forum Matt used to visit, one that catered to hardcore cavers who liked to explore places that weren't on any maps. I created an account and posted a vague message, looking for information on Horseshoe Mesa, any unusual activity or off-limits areas. Within minutes, I got a response from a user named Deepcore. "You don't want to go there. Trust me." I messaged them directly, explaining that my brother had gone missing in the area and that I was desperate for answers. They were hesitant at first, but after some back and forth, they finally opened up. "There's a reason that area's off limits," they wrote. "It's not just dangerous, it's cursed. People say there's something down there, something ancient. It's not natural." I pressed them for more details, but they refused to say much. The only thing they would admit was that the cave system was rumored to connect to a hidden facility, something built by the government decades ago. When I asked what kind of facility, their response sent a chill down my spine. They called it Project Chimera. Whatever they were working on, it got out. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the videos, the cryptic messages, the articles about missing hikers. Every noise in my apartment made me jump. A creak in the floorboards, the distant hum of the fridge. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps outside my window, but when I pulled back the curtain, there was nothing there. Just darkness. Then at 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You're next." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or had I really crossed a line? I tried to call the number, but it went straight to voicemail. The voice on the recording wasn't human. It was garbled, distorted, like it had been run through a dozen filters. All I could make out were 3 words, repeated over and over. "Don't open it." The next morning, I found a package on my doorstep. It was wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address, no markings. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found a single item, a flashlight. It wasn't just any flashlight. It was Matt's. I recognized the scratches on the handle, the duct tape he'd wrapped around it after it cracked during a climb. But there was something else. The flashlight was stained with blood, and etched into the metal in tiny jagged letters was a single word: run. For hours, I sat staring at the flashlight, Matt's flashlight. I couldn't stop running my fingers over the jagged letters etched into the metal. R-U-N. It wasn't just a warning. It felt like a plea. My brother had been in danger, and he'd known it. This flashlight wasn't just left for me to find. Someone had gone through the trouble of returning it, bloody, scarred, and screaming a single, desperate message. I should have listened. I should have packed my things, moved somewhere far away, and left this nightmare behind. But how could I? This was Matt, my brother. Whatever was in that cave, whatever had gotten out, it wasn't going to stop until I found him, or what was left of him. I took the next step I'd been dreading. I bought a one-way ticket to Arizona and drove straight to the Grand Canyon. I had no plan, no guide, and no gear beyond the basics. The park rangers had declared Horseshoe Mesa off-limits, so I'd have to avoid the marked trails. I didn't care. If it meant finding Matt or getting answers, I'd go in blind. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at the trailhead was the silence. No birds, no wind, not even the rustling of trees, just an oppressive, suffocating stillness that made my skin crawl. I parked my car next to Matt's, still sitting there like it was waiting for him to come back. Dust coated the windows, and the tires were half sunk into the dirt. But it hadn't been touched. No vandalism, no theft. Like everyone who saw it had felt some unspoken instinct to stay away. As I stepped onto the trail, I glanced at the cave entrance in the distance. It was a jagged black mouth carved into the earth, gaping and unnatural. Just looking at it made me feel nauseous, like I was standing too close to the edge of a cliff. It took me hours to get there. The closer I got, the worse the air became, thicker, heavier, carrying an odd metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. When I reached the cave, my legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. The entrance loomed over me, impossibly dark, swallowing the light from the setting sun. I didn't want to go in, but the flashlight in my pack felt like a burning weight, dragging me forward. I clicked it on, and the beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the jagged walls of the cave. The ground was uneven, littered with loose stones and debris. At first, it was quiet, just the crunch of my boots on the rocky floor, and the faint drip of water echoing in the distance. But the deeper I went, the stranger it became. The walls started to change, their rough surfaces giving way to something smoother, like they'd been polished. Then I saw the marks, the same claw-like gouges I'd seen in the video, carved deep into the stone. They weren't random. They formed patterns, symbols, spirals that made my head ache if I looked at them too long. About 20 minutes in, the smell hit me. It was faint at first, like something rotting far away, but it grew stronger with every step. Soon, it was unbearable, a mix of copper, decay and something I couldn't quite place. Something chemical. My stomach turned, and I had to stop to keep from vomiting. That's when I noticed the first body. It wasn't Matt. I don't know who it was, and I don't think I'll ever know. What was left of them barely resembled a person. Their torso was split open, ribs splayed outward like the petals of some grotesque flower. The flesh was covered in dark, oily patches that shimmered in the light, and their face was gone. Just a smooth, featureless skull, hollow and expressionless. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over something else. A severed arm. The fingers were curled into a claw, frozen mid-scream. The blood on it was dried and flaking, but the wound was too clean, too precise, like it had been cut by a machine. I don't know how I kept going. Part of me wanted to turn around, to leave and never look back, but something was driving me forward. A low, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the cave walls, pulling me deeper. It wasn't sound exactly. It was something else. A feeling, a presence. That's when I noticed the light. Faint and flickering, it danced at the edge of the tunnel ahead, casting long, distorted shadows. I turned off my flashlight and crept forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The light grew brighter as I approached, revealing a massive chamber. It wasn't a cave anymore. It was something else. The walls were lined with metal panels, cracked and rusting, covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. Wires dangled from the ceiling, sparking and hissing, and the floor was littered with debris, broken equipment, shattered glass, and more bodies. Some were fresher than others. In the center of the room was a massive circular door. It was embedded into the far wall, its surface covered in those same glowing symbols. It was slightly ajar, just enough to reveal the darkness beyond. Something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong, like it was older than the cave itself. And then I heard it, that sound from the video, a wet, grinding noise, like metal and flesh being twisted together. It came from behind the door, echoing through the chamber and rattling in my chest. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The noise grew louder, accompanied by a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the walls. Something moved in the shadows near the door. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, with limbs that bent in ways they shouldn't. Its skin was pale and glistening, stretched taut over sharp, angular bones. Its eyes, or what I think were its eyes, glowed faintly in the darkness, unblinking and predatory. I should have run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to get the hell out of there. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring at the thing as it stepped closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. It tilted its head, as if studying me, and then it opened its mouth. The sound it made wasn't human. It was a low, guttural hiss that vibrated through my skull, piercing and relentless. My vision blurred, and I stumbled backward, my flashlight clattering to the ground. The thing didn't chase me. It didn't need to. It just stood there, watching, as if it knew I wouldn't get far. I don't remember how I got out of the cave. My mind was blank, my body on autopilot. When I finally stumbled into the daylight, gasping for air, the sun was high in the sky. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the rocky ground, shaking and covered in sweat. I didn't go back for Matt. I couldn't. Whatever was in that cave, whatever was behind that door, it wasn't human, and it wasn't going to let him go. I wish I could tell you I stayed away after that I took what I'd seen as a warning and went back to my life, broken but alive. But some things don't let you go. That cave, that thing, they dug their claws into my brain and wouldn't let go. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The pale, glistening skin stretched too tight, the glowing eyes, and the way it looked at me. Not with hunger, not with anger, but with recognition, like it had seen me before. But what haunted me more than anything was Matt. I couldn't accept that he was just gone, that he'd been swallowed up by whatever nightmare lived in that cave. He was my brother, and if there was even the smallest chance he was still alive, I had to go back. The week after I escaped, I started preparing. This time, I wouldn't go in blind. I bought better gear, military-grade flashlights, a harness, climbing tools, and a flare gun. I even found a guy on a survivalist forum who sold me an old Geiger counter. He asked why I needed it, and I lied, saying I was planning a trip to an old uranium mine. If he didn't believe me, he didn't let on. The last thing I packed was Matt's flashlight. The blood had dried to a dark, rust-colored stain, and the word run was still etched into the handle, mocking me. I didn't care. If it had been with him when he disappeared, then maybe it would lead me to him. The second descent was worse, much worse. The air around the cave felt heavier this time, thicker, with that metallic tang that made my throat burn. It wasn't just the smell, it was the feeling, the way the very earth seemed to hum beneath my feet, like the cave itself was alive. I didn't linger at the entrance. I turned on the Geiger counter as I went in, and immediately it started clicking. Not fast, just enough to make my skin crawl. I didn't know what it meant, but it wasn't normal. None of this was. The first body I found was new. It wasn't there the last time. A man in his late 30s, maybe 40s, wearing hiking gear that looked practically untouched, except for his face. His face was gone. Not just torn off, but smooth, like the flesh had been dissolved into nothing. His empty eye sockets stared up at me, wide and frozen in terror. I didn't stop to examine him. I couldn't. The air felt thicker the deeper I went, and the hum grew louder, vibrating through my bones. It wasn't just a noise. It was a presence, wrapping itself around me, suffocating me. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the path ahead, but every step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the chamber, it was darker than before. The strange symbols on the walls weren't glowing anymore. They'd faded to faint, flickering outlines, like the embers of a dying fire. The massive circular door was still there, but this time, it wasn't ajar. It was open, fully. The darkness beyond the door was absolute. My flashlight barely pierced it, the beam swallowed by the blackness. But I could hear things. Movement. Wet, slithering sounds, punctuated by sharp, metallic clicks. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the debris-strewn floor. That's when I saw the blood, a trail of it, thick and dark, leading from the door into the chamber. It wasn't smeared or scattered. It was a clean line, like something had been dragged. My stomach turned as I followed it with my flashlight, praying it wouldn't lead me to what I feared most. It did. Matt was lying at the end of the trail, crumpled against the wall like a discarded doll. His clothes were shredded, his skin pale and slick with sweat, but he was alive, barely. I dropped to my knees beside him, shaking him, calling his name. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, I thought he didn't recognize me. Then, his lips parted, and he rasped a single word. "Run!" His voice was barely a whisper, raw and strained, but the desperation in it was unmistakable. I shook my head, gripping his shoulders. "No, we're getting out of here. I'm not leaving you. But he didn't respond. His gaze shifted past me, to the open door, and his expression twisted into something I'll never forget. Fear. Pure, primal fear. I turned to follow his gaze, and that's when I saw it. It was bigger than the thing I'd seen before. Much bigger. Its pale, glistening body unfolded from the darkness, limbs stretching unnaturally long, joints bending in ways that defied anatomy. Its skin was slick and glimmering, like it was covered in oil, and its head was wrong, too small for its body, with those same faintly glowing eyes that burned into me like fire. It didn't lunge, it didn't roar, it just stood there, watching us, its head cocked at an odd angle. I could feel its gaze, heavy and probing, like it was peeling me apart layer by layer. Then it moved, not toward me, but toward Matt. "No!" I screamed, fumbling for the flare gun in my pack. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, but I managed to fire. The flare shot through the air, bright and blinding, slamming into the thing's chest. It let out a sound, a high-pitched, keening wail that made my ears bleed, and stumbled back, its limbs thrashing wildly. I didn't wait to see what I would do next. I grabbed Matt, hoisting him onto my shoulder, and ran. The hum in the walls grew louder, more frantic, like the entire cave was screaming at me to stop. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling, and the air itself seemed to press against me, trying to force me back. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. By some miracle, I made it out. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the canyon in soft, golden light. I collapsed onto the dirt, gasping for air, Matt still limp in my arms. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, Matt stirred. His eyes opened, glossy and unfocused, and he whispered something I could barely hear. "They're awake now." Matt survived, but he hasn't spoken since that day. He just sits in a hospital bed, staring out the window, muttering to himself in a language I don't recognize. The doctors say it's trauma, that his mind is trying to protect itself by retreating, but I know better. Sometimes at night, I hear him whispering. It's not words, it's sounds. Metallic, wet, grinding sounds. The same ones I heard in the cave. And sometimes, I dream of the thing. Its pale, glistening skin, its too small head, the way it looked at me, like it knew me, like it was waiting for me to come back, because the door isn't closed. Not really. And I don't think it ever will be. A serial killer, known as the Faceless Man, was supposedly caught years ago. The dark web claims he's active again, and his latest victim was found in my backyard. Hey Reddit, I don't know if I should even be posting this, but I feel like I need to tell someone. Maybe you all can help me figure out what the hell is going on, because my brain hasn't stopped spinning since last night. I'm still shaking as I type this, so bear with me. For some context, I live in a small, quiet town in the Midwest. You know the kind. Streets roll up at 9 p.m. Everyone knows everyone, and the biggest scandal is when the local diner runs out of pie. I've lived here my whole life, and nothing weird or crazy ever happens. At least, it didn't until last night. So, it's 11:37 p.m. Yes, I checked the clock, and I'm sitting on my couch scrolling through TikTok, procrastinating on sleep as usual. My backyard is pretty big, with this old, rickety fence that backs up to a stretch of woods. At night, the woods are pitch black. No streetlights, no houses, just endless trees. It's creepy if you think about it too much, so I usually don't. Anyway, I was mid-scroll when I heard it. A loud, wet thud outside. At first, I thought it was a raccoon, or maybe a tree branch falling, but then it happened again. Thud, and again, thud. It sounded heavy, like someone was throwing a sack of potatoes against the ground. I paused the video I was watching, suddenly hyper-aware of how silent the house was. My stomach started doing this weird flip-floppy thing, you know, like when you're about to do something really dumb or dangerous. Here's where I should have just locked my doors, turned on all the lights, and called it a night. But no. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and went out to the back deck, telling myself it was probably just some stupid animal being stupid. The second I stepped outside, I regretted it. The air smelled wrong, like damp earth and iron, sharp and sickly sweet at the same time. I know that sounds dramatic, but that smell hit me like a punch in the gut. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, shaky because my hands were trembling. I swept it across the yard, and that's when I saw it. There was something lying in the grass near the fence. At first, I thought it was a pile of trash someone had dumped. Black plastic, maybe? But as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't trash. It was a person, a body. I froze. My brain was screaming at me to move, to run, to do anything but stand there like an idiot, but my legs wouldn't listen. The flashlight beam landed on the figure's face, or what should have been a face, but there wasn't one. The skin was gone, completely smooth, like someone had erased it with Photoshop. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, just smooth, pale skin stretched tight over a skull. I stumbled backward, almost dropping the flashlight. I don't remember running back inside, but the next thing I knew, I was locking the door and calling 911. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hit the numbers. The operator tried to calm me down, but I couldn't even explain what I'd seen. I just kept saying, "There's a body in my backyard. You have to send someone. Please, just send someone." The cops showed up faster than I thought they would. Maybe I sounded more hysterical than I realized. Or maybe the whole body in the backyard thing just gets top priority. Either way, within 10 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up to my house, lights flashing, but no sirens. I was pacing the living room, chewing my thumbnail down to the skin, trying not to throw up. When I opened the door, the officers looked more annoyed than concerned. There were 2 of them. Officer Daniels, a guy in his mid-40s, with a gut that strained against his uniform, was the one who did most of the talking. His partner, Officer Ruiz, was younger, maybe late 20s, and he hung back like he wasn't thrilled to be there. Daniel squinted at me like I'd just woken him up from the best nap of his life. "You said there's a body in your backyard?" Daniels asked, clipboard in hand, already scribbling something down. His tone made it clear he thought I was either drunk or high, or both. "Yes," I said, voice cracking. It's by the fence. You need to see it." Daniels exchanged a glance with Ruiz, and I could practically hear his internal sigh. "All right, show us." I led them out back, flashlight in hand, though my legs felt like jelly the whole way. The smell was still there, metallic and nauseating, but fainter now, like it had started to dissipate. When I pointed the flashlight toward the spot where I'd seen the body, my heart dropped into my stomach. It was gone. I stared at the patch of grass, stunned. The ground was still torn up, with streaks of dark, wet dirt where the body had been, but the figure itself, gone. I turned to the officers, trying to explain. "It was right here," I said, voice trembling. "I swear, it was right here. There was a body. It didn't have a face, like no features at all. It was... Daniels held up a hand to cut me off. No face, huh? He was smirking now, like I'd just told him Bigfoot was using my Wi-Fi. Ruiz, to his credit, looked less smug, but I could tell he wasn't buying it either. I'm not making this up, I insisted. There was blood, and the smell. Can't you smell that? I gestured around wildly, like the air itself would back me up. But the officers just stood there, unmoved. Daniel shone his flashlight over the yard, scanning the fence line and the woods beyond. Look, miss, it's late. Maybe you saw a shadow or a deer, and your mind... I didn't see a deer, I snapped, louder than I intended. It was a body. Someone dumped it here, and now it's gone. Ruiz stepped forward, kneeling to inspect the ground where I'd pointed. His flashlight beam lingered on the streaks in the dirt, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt on his face. But then he stood up, brushing his hands on his pants. There's some disturbed soil here, Ruiz said, glancing at Daniels. Could have been an animal, maybe? Daniel snorted. Probably a raccoon. They'll dig up just about anything. Miss, is it possible you had I don't know, a nightmare? Fell asleep on the couch and imagined the whole thing. I wanted to scream. Instead, I clenched my fists and forced myself to breathe. I didn't imagine it, I said through gritted teeth. I called you because there was a body in my backyard. Someone needs to look into this. Daniel sighed like he'd just aged 5 years. We'll file a report, he said, already scribbling on his clipboard again. But unless we've got a body, there's not much we can do. Probably just some animal dragging trash around. Trash? I echoed, incredulous. Trash doesn't leave bloodstains. Ruiz gave me a small, apologetic shrug, and I hated him for it. Daniels tipped his hat and muttered something about getting some sleep. Just like that, they were gone, leaving me alone with the empty backyard and the faint, lingering smell of iron. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the doors locked, the lights on, and the curtains drawn, jumping at every little creak and groan the house made. My brain wouldn't shut up, replaying the scene in my backyard over and over like a broken record. I kept telling myself I hadn't imagined it. I knew what I'd seen. I wasn't crazy. But if that was true, where was the body? When the sun finally came up, I forced myself to go back outside. In the daylight, the yard didn't look nearly as menacing. The grass was still damp with dew. The trees swayed lazily in the breeze, and the birds were chirping like nothing had happened. But the ground where the body had been was still torn up, and there were faint smears of something dark staining the grass. Blood? Maybe. It had dried to a rusty brown. I thought about calling the police again, but decided against it. If they didn't believe me the first time, they weren't going to believe me now. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I went online. Specifically, I went digging on the dark web. I know. Bad idea, right? But I was desperate. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to find them on Google. I'd read enough stories about people finding weird, illegal stuff on the dark web, and I figured if something shady was happening in my backyard, maybe someone out there knew about it. It took me a while to figure out how to access it. I downloaded Tor, set up a VPN, and started poking around. Most of what I found was just sketchy marketplaces and forums full of wannabe hackers and conspiracy theorists. But then I stumbled across a thread that stopped me cold. The title was simple: The Faceless Man Lives. I clicked on it, heart pounding. The thread was filled with posts from people claiming they'd seen him, or at least what he left behind. Bodies with no faces, dumped in random locations, The descriptions were eerily similar to what I'd seen in my backyard. No one seemed to know who he was or why he did it, but the legend went back years. According to one post, he had been caught a long time ago, but some people believed it was just a scapegoat, an innocent man pinned with the crimes to calm the public. The real faceless man, they said, was still out there, and now he was back. The more I read, the more my stomach churned. One post, buried halfway down the page, sent a shiver down my spine. If you find one of his victims, he'll come back for you. I closed my laptop and sat there, staring at the blank screen, trying to process what I'd just read. If the faceless man was real, and if the body I'd seen was one of his victims, was I next? After finding that thread about the faceless man, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just signed my own death warrant by even looking it up. I know it sounds stupid, but there was this weight in my chest, like I'd opened a door I couldn't close. I tried to go about my day like normal, made coffee, doom-scrolled social media, even tried to binge a comfort show, but nothing felt right. My house was too quiet, the air too heavy, and I couldn't stop checking the backyard, half expecting to see something or someone waiting for me. That night, things got worse. It started with a notification. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when my phone buzzed. I grabbed it, assuming it was some random spam email, but it wasn't. It was a text. The number was blocked. At first, I thought it was some dumb prank or phishing attempt. You know, those scams where they try to scare you into clicking a link. But when I opened the text, my blood ran cold. The message was simple. Why did you call the police? I sat up so fast, I nearly dropped the phone. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my hands started to sweat. I reread the message at least 10 times, hoping I'd imagined it or maybe misread it. But no, that's what it said. I didn't reply. Instead, I stared at the screen, debating whether to block the number or call the cops again. But before I could decide, another message came through. You shouldn't have seen that. Now I was panicking. I scrambled out of bed, locking every door and window in the house. My fingers were shaking so badly I could barely work the locks. Every little noise outside, a creak, a rustle of leaves, a gust of wind, sounded like someone creeping closer. My stomach churned, and I felt like I might throw up. The third message came while I was barricading the front door with a chair. I'm watching you. I froze. For a moment, I didn't even breathe. Slowly, I turned toward the window, half expecting to see someone standing there, staring in at me. But there was no one, just the faint outline of the backyard, dark and empty under the dim moonlight. My phone buzzed again. You left the curtains open. My heart stopped. I ran to the window, yanking the curtains shut so hard the rod nearly came out of the wall. My mind was racing. How could they know that? Were they actually outside? Was I losing it? I forced myself to take deep breaths, trying to think rationally. Maybe it was just someone messing with me. Maybe one of the cops had told someone about my call, and now some bored kid in town was trying to freak me out. It had to be something like that, right? Except the texts didn't stop. For the next hour, they came one after another. Sometimes it was vague threats. You're not safe. I know where you sleep. And sometimes it was weirdly specific. One said, do you still keep your spare key under the flower pot? I do. Another said, nice blue pajamas, which I was wearing. I kept checking the windows, but I never saw anyone. I turned off all the lights, thinking maybe I was making it too easy for them to see me. But even in the dark, the texts kept coming. Then, at 3:17 a.m., they sent a photo. I almost didn't want to open it. My thumb hovered over the screen, my stomach doing flips. But my curiosity won out. I tapped on the image, and my phone screen filled with a grainy, low-light photo of my backyard, the exact spot where I'd found the body. Except now, there was something new in the picture. A man. He was standing just inside the tree line, partially hidden by the shadows, but you could see enough to tell something was wrong. He was tall, too tall to be normal, with long gangly limbs that seemed to bend at odd angles. His face, if you could call it that, was smooth and featureless, just like the body I'd found. No eyes, no mouth, nothing, just blank, pale skin. The photo wasn't live, but I swear I could feel him staring at me through the screen. I dropped the phone like it had burned me, backing away as if the photo itself was dangerous. My brain was screaming at me to do something, call the cops, leave the house, anything. But I couldn't think straight. All I could do was stare at the phone, the image still glowing faintly in the dark. Then the final message came. Open the door. I don't know why, but that's when I lost it. I grabbed my phone and ran to the bathroom, locking myself inside. I sat there for hours, curled up on the cold tile floor, clutching my phone like it was some kind of lifeline. The texts stopped after that, but I didn't dare leave the bathroom until the sun came up. The next morning, I checked the backyard again. The grass was still torn up, the faint bloodstains still there, but there was no sign of anyone. I searched the tree line for footprints, or anything that might prove I wasn't losing my mind, but the ground was undisturbed. If someone had been out there, they covered their tracks well. I called the police again, but I didn't mention the texts or the photo. Instead, I just said I was worried about a trespasser. They sent someone to patrol the area, but they didn't find anything. They told me to install some cameras and let them know if anything else happened. That was it. By the time they left, I felt more alone than ever. That night, I didn't even bother going to bed. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, clutching a kitchen knife and jumping at every little sound. I was so paranoid, I almost didn't notice the noise at first. A soft scraping, like something dragging across the side of the house. It started near the front door, then slowly moved around the perimeter, getting louder as it went. It stopped outside the living room window. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just sat there, frozen, clutching the knife so tightly, my knuckles turned white. The scraping sound lingered for a few seconds, then stopped. I thought it was over, but then I heard it, a faint, hollow knock on the glass. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out from the fear, because the next thing I knew, it was morning, and the house was eerily quiet again. The curtains were still drawn, but when I finally worked up the courage to peek outside, there was something new, scratched into the glass of the living room window, in jagged, uneven letters, were 3 words: "See you soon." I spent most of the day convincing myself I was going insane, because honestly, what else could explain all of this? The body in the yard, the texts, the scratches on the window. It didn't make sense. Normal people don't just wake up one day in the middle of a horror movie. At least, that's what I told myself as I sat on my couch, staring blankly at the scratched words on the glass. But the fear didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. Every creak of the house made my skin crawl. Every shadow in the corners of the room felt like it was moving. I couldn't keep living like this. So, I did what any paranoid person with a little extra cash and too much time on their hands would do. I ordered security cameras. By the end of the day, I had 4 of them set up. 1 on the front porch, 1 overlooking the backyard, and 2 covering the sides of the house. They weren't anything fancy, just some basic motion-activated cameras I grabbed from the hardware store. But they made me feel a little safer, or at least less helpless. Now, if anything or anyone came near my house again, I'd know. That night, I locked myself in my bedroom with my laptop open on the nightstand, streaming the live feeds from the cameras. The house was dark and still, and every second felt like an hour. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. The yard was empty, the woods were silent, and there wasn't a single sign of movement. Until 2:43 a.m. I'll never forget that time, because I watched the clock tick over, staring at the backyard feed. For a moment, nothing happened. Just the same still image of the yard, bathed in the faint glow of the camera's infrared light. And then, out of nowhere, a figure appeared. It stepped out from the tree line like it had been waiting there all along. Tall, thin, with unnaturally long limbs that seemed to move in slow, jerky motions. Even in the grainy night vision, I could tell it wasn't normal. Its head was smooth and featureless, just like the body I'd found. But this time, it wasn't lying still. It was moving. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a scream. The figure stopped at the edge of the yard, standing perfectly still, like it knew it was being watched. Then it tilted its head, just slightly, like it was listening for something. Watching the screen, I felt like I couldn't breathe. And then, it turned. It turned toward the camera. I slammed the laptop shut so hard I thought I'd break it. For a few seconds, I just sat there in the dark, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was a glitch, a trick of the light, anything but what I'd just seen. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was real. It was in my backyard, and it knew I was watching. The next morning, I forced myself to check the footage. My hands shook as I opened the laptop and navigated to the recordings from the night before. I skipped through the hours of still, empty frames until I reached the moment I'd seen the figure. There it was, stepping out of the trees, moving in that slow, unnatural way. I felt sick just looking at it. But as I scrubbed through the video, something else caught my attention. Something I hadn't noticed in the live feed. At 2:45 a.m., the figure did something new. It walked, no, it strode, across the yard, heading straight for the house, straight for the camera. Its movements were smoother now, more deliberate, like it was no longer trying to hide. When it reached the base of the camera, it stopped, staring directly into the lens. And then it reached out. Its hand, or what should have been a hand, was pale and skeletal, with impossibly long fingers that seemed to twist and bend at unnatural angles. It pressed those fingers against the camera, tilting it upward so all I could see was the sky. The feed cut out seconds later. I rewound the footage at least a dozen times, hoping I'd missed something that could explain it. A mask, a costume, some kind of elaborate prank, but the more I watched, the less sense it made. The way it moved, the way it stared into the camera, it wasn't human. It couldn't be. I didn't know what to do. Calling the cops again was out of the question. They'd already written me off as a paranoid weirdo, and it wasn't like I could go outside and confront it. Not that I wanted to. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I stayed up all night, watching the cameras, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. Not that night, anyway. But the next morning, When I stepped outside to check the camera, I found something new. The camera was still there, hanging at a weird angle where the figure had moved it, but scratched into the metal casing in the same jagged letters as the window were 3 words: "Still watching you." I ripped the camera off the wall and threw it in the trash. I was done playing games. If it wanted to watch me, fine. Let it watch me lose my mind. I wasn't going to let it scare me anymore. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't going to stop. That night, I set up a motion detector alarm in the backyard. If anything moved out there, it would trigger a loud, piercing siren. I went to bed clutching my phone, determined to sleep for the first time in days. But the alarm went off at exactly 3 a.m. The sound was deafening, echoing through the house like an air raid siren. I bolted upright, heart racing, and grabbed my phone to check the camera feeds. But when I opened the app, the backyard feed was dark. The camera wasn't just offline, it was gone. I ran to the window, throwing the curtains open, and froze. The backyard was empty, silent. There was no sign of anyone or anything, but the motion detector's siren kept blaring as if the yard was crawling with intruders. And then it stopped. Just stopped. Like someone had flipped a switch. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding, and that's when I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock at the back door. The knock at the back door wasn't loud. It was soft, almost polite, but that made it worse. My brain screamed at me not to move, not to go anywhere near it, but my body had other plans. My legs felt like jelly as I crept through the dark house, each step quieter than the last. I told myself I wasn't going to open the door. I just wanted to see, to confirm that there was nothing there, that I was just losing my mind. The closer I got, the colder the air seemed to get. My breath fogged in front of me, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. When I finally reached the kitchen, I stopped in front of the door, staring at it like it might lunge at me. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might wake the neighbors. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for the knock to come again. But it didn't. The silence pressed down on me like a weight. Finally, I forced myself to peek through the little frosted glass pane in the door, angling my head so I could see outside. At first, I didn't see anything, just the yard, bathed in moonlight, and the faint outline of the woods beyond. But then I saw it. Movement, slow and deliberate, at the edge of the tree line. It was there. The figure stood just at the edge of the light, half hidden in the shadows. It was taller than I remembered, its limbs even longer and more twisted. But it wasn't just standing there. It was holding something. A bundle, cradled in its arms like a child. My stomach turned as I squinted, trying to make out what it was, and then it stepped forward, just enough for the light to catch what it was holding. My blood ran cold. It was the camera. The same one I'd torn down and thrown away. The one that had been scratched with those 3 words. Still watching you. The figure lifted it higher, almost like it was showing it to me, taunting me. Then, with one smooth, unnatural motion, it crushed the camera in its hand. The metal crumpled like paper, and pieces of plastic rained to the ground. I stumbled back from the door, my chest tightening. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I knew I should call someone, anyone, but who would believe me? The cops had already written me off, and I wasn't about to explain this to a 911 operator. What could I even say? "Hi," There's a faceless monster in my backyard, and it just crushed my security camera. Before I could decide what to do, the motion detector alarm went off again. The shrill siren filled the house, and I clapped my hands over my ears, teeth clenching. I glanced out the window again, expecting to see the figure retreating into the woods, but it wasn't there anymore. The yard was empty. The alarm suddenly cut out, plunging the house into silence again. My phone buzzed, and I jumped, nearly dropping it. Another text, another block number. It's inside. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around, scanning the room. The door was still locked. The windows were shut. There was no way it could have gotten in. No way. But the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. Every creak and groan of the old wood floors sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I backed away from the kitchen, clutching my phone like it was a weapon. My mind was racing. I tried to tell myself the text was just a sick joke. Someone was messing with me, trying to scare me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a joke. I felt it. I wasn't alone. As I crept through the house, I became hyper-aware of every sound. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, the distant rustle of leaves outside. And then I heard it. A soft, deliberate scrape, like something dragging across the floor. It came from the living room. I froze, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might burst. The scrape came again, slow and steady, closer this time. I forced myself to move, stepping toward the sound with shaky legs. My grip on the phone tightened as I peered around the corner into the living room. At first, I didn't see anything. The room was dark, the curtains still drawn, but then my eyes adjusted, and I saw it. The figure was standing in the center of the room. It was taller than I'd thought, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. Its long, gangly limbs seemed to twist and bend in ways that defied logic, and its blank, smooth face was tilted slightly to the side, as if it were studying me. For a moment, neither of us moved. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at that empty, featureless face, and then it took a step toward me. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and landed hard on the floor. The phone slipped from my hand, skidding across the hardwood. The figure didn't rush me. It didn't lunge. It just moved, slow and deliberate, each step sending a fresh jolt of terror through me. I scrambled backward, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. My hand closed around something, a lamp, and I hurled it at the figure with all my strength. The lamp shattered against its chest, pieces of glass raining to the floor, but it didn't even flinch. It just kept coming. When my back hit the wall, I realized there was nowhere left to go. The figure loomed over me, its faceless head tilting down as if to get a better look. My mind was screaming at me to move, to fight, to do something. But I was frozen. Then it reached out. Its hand was cold and impossibly smooth, like marble, as it brushed against my cheek. For a moment, I thought it was going to kill me. But instead, it leaned closer, its featureless face mere inches from mine. I could feel its breath, if you could call it that, cold and hollow against my skin. And then it whispered, no voice, no sound, just a thought that appeared in my mind clear as day. You are mine now. I don't remember what happened after that. When I came to, it was morning and the house was empty. The cameras were gone, the alarms were silent, and there wasn't a single trace of the figure. But something's changed. I can feel it deep down, like a shadow that's always just out of sight. I don't leave the house anymore. I don't sleep. I don't eat. I just sit here, waiting, knowing it'll come back. It always comes back, because the faceless man doesn't just kill, he takes. And now, he's taken me.